I didn't realize it's 5 years since you spoke here. It was 5 years ago. I just checked the emails. Is that possible?
We've got already 5 years.
I think it's 5 years. Anyway, but I'm going to say basically the same thing that I said then, but only more so. You have a good friend, and Rabbi Liff is my good friend for a long time. But sometimes you don't even realize what's going on behind the scenes. Only when I saw Rabbi Liff's book at my Rebbe's side, and I highly recommend that you read it. We have one copy, but we will be selling other copies, and it's highly recommended. With Rabbi Liff, it looks like an average person, a colleague of mine and everything, and all of a sudden I find out, only from the book, how close of a relationship he had, not with one of the Gedolei Hador, but one after the other, after the other, after the other. And you read his book and you will see. And again, these are some of the Gedolim I also knew, but had no intimate contact the way Rabbi Liff did. And some of them I had no contact with, we just knew about them. But virtually every Gadol from the last generation, both in America and in Eretz Yisrael, that you mentioned, Rabbi Liff had contact and connection with them. Today he's going to speak about Rav Shach, whose yahrzeit was just very recently. And, there's a lot of revisionist history in Orthodox Judaism. You guys know what that means? Okay, they talk about things that didn't happen as if they happened, and things that happened as if they didn't happen. So it's always important to have somebody who knows firsthand how Rav Shach dealt with things. It's a great pleasure and an honor that Rabbi Liff is going to share some of the experiences he had that were really kept behind the scenes. Like, again, I knew him for many years until the book came out. I didn't realize what greatness Rabbi Liff assimilated, and therefore the greatness that he himself has.
Again, Yashikayach to Rabbi Karlinsky, Rabbi Skudak, all the Rabbeim, and I give a shout out to my good friend Dan, who we had the opportunity to be together in Menachem Shach for 2 years. I'll try to raise my voice. I am a little bit hoarse, okay, but we'll try to raise the voice. And I don't see Max, but I guess Max is in Chutzlatz. Okay. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share some thoughts about a great, great person. When we say great person, really, as the Reshiva explained, I had the unique opportunity to be able to meet really the top Gedolim of the previous generation and the present generation. And really, it was I think a fluke in history that a little schnook like me should have this opportunity to be able to really glean greatness from such great people. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts people into certain positions, and I guess he found that somehow I needed to be at these particular Gedolim's homes. The name of the book is At His Rebbe's Side. Okay, Rebbe's plural, because I really discussed many, many Gedolim. So when Karlinsky asked me 2 weeks ago to speak about one of the Gedolim, or to come and speak, I said I would like to speak about Rav Shach, because his yahrzeit was just approximately 2 weeks ago. Rav Shach passed away 24 years ago. And it's a good period of time. But if you analyze his legacy that he leaves us in the Torah world in Eretz Yisrael and throughout the world, it's really incomprehensible what kind of greatness he had and how he impacted the Torah world. In my mind, just to associate a little bit, you might have heard of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was the leading gadol in Eretz Yisrael in the formation of the development of Orthodox Jewry and the Torah world in its infancy. The way I would describe him is the architect of Torah Judaism in the world that we see today. He was the one that had the famous meeting with David Ben-Gurion, where they discussed secular Zionism versus Orthodoxy, and from that time and onwards, there was a situation that the yeshiva students were given a deference or a patur, however you want to describe it, as long as they were sitting and learning Torah, and that was Torah Sumanasa, that the yeshiva students would not have to go to the army. That was something that was set up in the original linchpins of the formation of the State of Israel. And it was done by a very, very secular Jew after a meeting with this great, great Orthodox rabbi, the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Yeshaya Karelitz. And then subsequently, after the Chazon Ish passed away, there were great Gedolah living in Eretz Yisrael throughout the time. But in my mind, the one that really took the mantle and extended it into a greater venue was Rabbi Eliezer Shach. Rabbi Eliezer Shach was a younger Rosh Hashiva than the Chazon Ish. He was younger than the Chazon Ish. He was born 125 years ago. According to some, he was even 108 when he passed away. But they say it's a mistake. It was only a mere 104 years when he passed away. Started out at 11 years old, leaving his home from Yalandsblok, I can't even pronounce it properly, but a small town in Lithuania, in Lita, and he went to learn in the then Panovich Yeshiva, which was in the town of Panovich. And he learned by Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, who was the leading Talmid Chacham and Gadol in Panovich. When he was 13 or 14 years old, he transferred to another fairly well-known yeshiva called Slabotka. And there he became a disciple of the Alter from Slabotka. 13 or 14 years old, becoming a Talmud of the Alter. Subsequently, he went to study in Slutsk by Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, who was the yeshiva of Slutsk, who eventually became his uncle, who eventually made the shidduch between his wife, who was the niece of the Rabbi Zalman Meltzer. And so he must have been a worthy figure even from the time he was very, very young. Eventually he moved. I'm giving you different names of towns and different yeshivas, so some of you might not be familiar with it. For those of us that were brought up in the yeshiva world, these are like the name brands. This is like Tesla. This is like, the greatest names that you could find in the world. You know what I mean? Like the best. So Slutsk, Rabbi Zalman eventually moved the yeshiva to Kletsk. Slutsk and Kletsk, they all got that Kletsky kind of name, Slutsk kind of name, and he became a very young Ram underneath first Rabbi Zalman, and then the great son-in-law of Rabbi Zalman, Rabbi Aaron Kotler. Rabbi Aaron Kotler Zatzal, who was also one of the founding figures in the Kletsky yeshiva. Rabbi Aaron became famous afterwards, moving to America and opening up Lakewood. And that whole phenomena, which is something which needs a discussion in its own as well. I just recently read the biography of Rabbi Gedalia Eisman, who, I didn't finish it, but it's a tremendous book, it's worthwhile to read it, the Mashgiach of Kol Torah, who himself is an unsung hero in the Torah world. Besides being this great Mashgiach, he was an unbelievable Talmid Chacham, and he studied in Kletsk, and he said over that in Kletsk, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who was a super, super genius, we speak about Rav Shach. Rav Shach was considered a prodigy from the time he was a young kid. He was what's called an Eloi, really a tremendous, tremendous mind. But Rabbi Aaron Kotler was just beyond. And they say, Rav Gedalia said that in Kletsk, very few people really understood Rabbi Aaron's shir. Who was the one that used to say it over? Rav Shach used to say it over, and he made it palatable. He was able to somehow bring it to life. Skipping ahead a little bit, Rav Shach eventually makes it out to Eretz Yisrael in approximately 1940. Makes it here. He gets a visa to be able to come from his uncle, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, who had moved to Eretz Yisrael. And he started out in a yeshiva which was called the Yishuv HaChodosh, which was a yeshiva that also had secular studies. And at a certain point, in a meeting that he had with the Chazon Ish felt this was not the proper place for him to be, even though he was doing a lot of great work. And eventually, he was hired at a certain point by the Panovich Rav to go back to his alma mater and to become a Rosh Hashiva in Panovich. And he became known after the Panovich Rav passed away. He was the leading figure in the yeshiva, together with Reb Shmuel Rozovsky and Rebbe Povarsky. But his impact was really magnetic. I myself, the first time I met him, the first time I heard him, was at a Levaya in 1973, when I came as a young Talmud to learn the Mir Yeshiva. And at that point, Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, the Mashgiach in the Mir, and the Mashgiach eventually in Panovich, passed away. I went to Hespedim, I went to Levaya, and I heard it. That was the first time I heard Rav Shach spoke. And already from that initial meeting, I heard something very special. There was something. He was charismatic. That's the only way I describe it. He had a charismatic personality, but he was his charisma was not fake. It was real. He really, really meant what he said. And as a bacher in the Mir, I was in the Mir Yeshiva. We had great Rabbeim. We shared Rabbeim together, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz and Reb Nachum Pertzovitz and Reb Einish Finkel. But there were great people in Eretz Yisrael to go hear it, to go see. So I decided one day I'm going to go to Panovich because I heard Rav Shach was going to give a Musar talk, a Musar Shmuz. And I spent the afternoon Seder in Panovich. I was in a single bacher. I had a wonderful discussion and learning with Reb David Povarsky. And then all of a sudden, at a certain time, I can't remember, it was 6 or 6:30, all of a sudden I hear rustling and bustling. Everyone's standing up, the tables and chairs. I figured, the yeshiva's Shach's coming in to give a Musar Shmuz. No, the whole yeshiva packs out. They moved to a side room. Because in Panovich, they didn't have Musar talks in the Beis Medrash. Beis Medrash was for Torah learning, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, Musar, Hashkafa. You moved to the so-called book described as the Beis HaMusar. So it was the first time the Mir Yeshiva wasn't like that. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz gave shmuzin in the Mir. If I'm not mistaken, Reb Yerucham in the Mir also gave shmuzin in the Beis Medrash. It was an integral part of the learning. But in Panovich, that has to do with going back to the old machlokus about Musar within the yeshiva movement. We're not going to get into that discussion. But it was an amazing thing to hear him speak, and I was captivated by him. Subsequently, and I'm giving my personal glimpses has to do with me. I hope I'm not being too egotistical, but I became a young Rebbe in one of the American yeshivas, and I came up with this concept, hey, let's take a trip to Bnei Brak. We can meet Gedolim like I met Gedolim, and I would take my students, and we would go down to Bnei Brak. And at that point, Rav Shach was in the height of his greatness as far as being the leading gadol in Eretz Yisrael. Most of his day was spent in the yeshiva, giving shiurim and talking and learning with talmidim. He gave advice to anyone that came to his house. There were certain hours in the afternoon where you could go to him, and I was able to get talmidim to come, and they would hear him speak, and it was amazing. He would get up and he would speak for them, and he was then in his early to mid 80s at that point. My relationship with him spanned approximately 15 to almost 20 years of the end of his life. And it was American boys that had come from modern Orthodox backgrounds on the whole. And they were all captivated by Rav Shach. Rav Shach really knew how to speak the language. He didn't speak high intellectual. He really spoke down to earth. He spoke about culture. He spoke about every nation has its culture, okay? And he says in France they have French culture, and in America you have American culture. English have English culture. He says, what is the culture? What is the culture of the Jewish people? And he turned and he said, the books, the Sfarim, the mitzvahs, the Ma'asim Tovim, the Shabbos, the family togetherness, the midos. That's our culture. And the books are open for all to come and to hear. And this is your legacy. This is your legacy. Your legacy is that you have something which is thousands of years old that was given specifically to our nation, to your parents, to your neshamas, and now you're in an environment where you have the full opportunity to be able to glean the greatness of the Torah. And those were his words. And many, many times he would turn to me and say, Rav Liff, he spoke in Ivrit, but he wasn't sure if the boys understood Ivrit. He says, Rav Liff, translate for them in English. So I would translate to the best of my ability his remarks, And then he would say, no, das alles gesagt, you said of everything? I said, yeah. And then he would continue. And then I would again have to translate the rest of his words. It was amazing to be able to see it. I had one Talmud who came for, in those days, it was a gap year. They came for 1 year because I dealt with post-high school students, and the majority of them came from modern backgrounds. They were planning on going to university afterwards, and this was always a discussion that we had. Tried to convince students to spend maybe another year. Many of our students would go back and would go to universities, but a second year really was an imperative, because if you didn't get that second year and all you got was that first year, all you did was you removed some of the what's called the sur meira, some of the American cultural pools, we call American English-speaking cultural pools, whatever it was, but you're not really based completely in your understanding of the Torah to be able to be independent and to live independent lives as a good Jew. Come back for a second year. So we tried to convince boys to come back for a second year. And sometimes parents wanted their children to continue, and especially in those years, it wasn't a given to come back for a second year. Today it became more popular. KBY, Shalavim, all the different yeshiva programs. The second year is like a given. It's like a given thing. And most of the programs at Yeshiva University and everything else, Torah, they want students to come back for a second year, because then when they come to Yeshiva University, at that point, they come a lot stronger than when they came if they wouldn't have come to the yeshiva. There was one student that he wanted to come back for a second year. His parents wanted him to start school. I said, come, we'll go discuss it with Rav Shach. Took him down to Bnei Brak. I was able to get in. And when I came, the Gabbai said to me, Rav Liff, today Rav Shach can't see anybody. Today is Shir Klali preparation day. He prepares Shir Klali. And when the Shir Klali comes, when he's going to give a public Shir for the entire yeshiva, his mind is completely focused on that preparation. He can't speak to anybody. So I said, I understand. I didn't realize at the time that was the day that I picked to come. But I said, okay, listen, all I can say is that we tried to come, and the boy's leaving tomorrow night, and that was the end of the conversation. Now comes the clincher of some of Rav Shach's greatness. Following morning in the dormitory of this particular yeshiva, at 6:30 in the morning, there used to be something called a payphone. Did you guys ever remember hearing about a payphone? There was a payphone in the dormitory. The phone rings, 6:30 in the morning in this particular yeshiva. Most boys weren't up, but it happened to be it was a madrich that was up, and he answered the phone, and he hears on the other side, Medaber po Eliezer Shach. This is Eliezer Shach speaking. So first he thought it was like a joke, someone's mimicking Rav Shach, and he's trying to catch it, trying to pull him, and then then finally he realized it's really Rav Shach. He says, is so-and-so, this bacher, available? So he quickly ran to get him. And he pulled him out of bed, and he brought him over to the payphone. And there was a little bit of translation, like I did by Rav Shach. This madrich spoke Ivrit, and he was able to answer and be able to speak on his behalf. And he gave him hadracha. He gave him some modification about how he could explain it to his parents to maybe come back for half a year, see if you can get a half a year out of them, and then you promise you're going to go to college. Eventually, this certain particular Talmud who got that hadracha from Rav Shach ended up going to Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, and he was able to get a degree. He happens to be a practicing dentist. He happens to be my dentist today. He does a great job, I can tell you that. And he's a Ben Torah. Why? Because Rav Shach cared about an individual to pick up, to call him. He said, there's a boy that needs my advice, so I'm going to do it. To me, that's my personal glimpse of the greatness of Rav Shach. He had the whole entire yeshiva world under his head. He had his shiurim. He had his own life. But his life meant the individual student. And he could handle everything. I had my oldest son, who's today is a Rosh Yeshiva, and I'm together with him in the Yeshiva in Beit Shemesh. My oldest son, Dovber, when he was younger, he suffered from a severe stutter. From the time he was young, he had a difficult stutter. We took him to psychologists, we had therapists, everything else. But it's difficult when you have a stutter. It's not an easy thing, especially when you're in a class and you're trying to learn Gemara and everything else. 10 years old, one of the places I would take him to get a bracha was to go to Rav Shach. And I expected Rav Shach would give him a bracha. Rav Shach sat with my son for a half hour. And he gave him chizuk. And he told him, I want to tell you. And he named off a whole list of different gedolim who were great, great orators. And he said, this one was a stutterer, and this one was a stutterer. And Moshe Rabbeinu had a stutter. And Mirza Hashem, you're going to get over it. I have to tell you, my son now speaks publicly, both in Hebrew and in English. He speaks in the yeshiva, gives shiurim. He speaks underneath chuppahs for his talmidim. Because Rav Shach took the time out to give him personal chizuk. He cared about him. There's a similar story which I myself didn't witness, but I heard about it. One of the greatest philanthropists in the Jewish yeshiva world in the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s was a man by the name of Mr. Moshe Reichman. Moshe Reichman and his brothers founded a company called Olympia York. They were one of the greatest builders in the real estate industry for many, many years. They built the Canary Wharf complex in England. They were known to be people that kept Shabbos, and they were Talmidei Chachamim. In the 80s, there was a similar situation what's going on here as far as the yeshiva is not getting funds. I don't remember exactly all the details. And Rav Shach had discussions with the Reichman family, and Moshe Reichman put in a phenomenal amount of money into the yeshiva system at that time. Rav Shach was considered the trusted figure, and Reichman would come many, many times on his private jet, and he would come to have meetings with Rav Shach, and they would discuss who's getting what, what's happening. One time, Moshe Reichman had an appointment to come see Rav Shach, and it happened to be during the times when other people were also coming in, and before Moshe Reichman came, there was a young Avreich whose son was 12 years old, was learning in a cheder, and it just wasn't happening. He wasn't enjoying it. So he came to get a bracha and to get chizuk. Rav Shach sat with the boy and he said, Ata ohev Gemara? He says, no, ani lo ohev Gemara. I don't like Gemara. He says, what's wrong? He says, my head doesn't get it. I don't understand it. The Rebbe tries this, the Rebbe tries that. I'm not getting it. So Rav Shach said, would you mind if I learn with you a little bit? He says, no. Opened up an Elam Metzius, the parak they were learning, and Rav Shach spent 45 minutes learning with this boy a sugya, and he gave him all of Rav Shach. He made it exciting, and he made it real, he made it palatable. And this boy just felt like $1 million afterwards. Now, while this was happening, Moshe Reichman had come for his appointment. And the Rabbeim were coming in, and I noticed for a fact, when Rav Shach was focused on the Gemara, there was nothing else that was there. So that the Rabbeim came in, and Rav Shach was teaching, they couldn't stop him. And they went out, and they say, he's teaching. So Moshe Reichman at a certain point said, listen, I have to leave. He wasn't upset. He said, I understand Rav Shach said other things going on, and tell him I'll come back. Anyway, after Rav Shach gave this boy chizuk, and he gave him what he did, and the Rabbeim came in, and they said, Moshe Reichman was here, he left. So he said, Moshe Reichman will come back. Moshe Reichman understands that the importance of what his philanthropist abilities is all about is that people should be learning Torah. So the tachlis, the whole point of it is to have people learning. It's that yeshiva boy should be sitting and learning. So if this yeshiva boy who I'm learning with, because Rav Shach looked at a 12-year-old boy not as a 12-year-old boy, he looked at him as a potential Torah scholar. And if he'll get the right attitude, it will change his life. He says this is what the whole purpose of the money is for, that Torah should be learned. And Moshe Reichman came back. Moshe Reichman understood that. Rav Shach cared about all of Klal Yisrael. He was really phenomenal. I mean, I took a friend of mine who was then involved with Russian Jewry in the fledgling stages when the Glasnost had just come into play and the Iron Curtain was opening up and people were able to leave. And the government in Russia was then open to having Torah studies and stuff like that. But this person that was involved with Russian Jewry, he debated about where should because he was involved with the Reichman family, he gave a lot of money for the Russian Jewry situation. Where should we put the focus of the education for Russian Jews? Should we be focused on trying to get them to come out, maybe coming to Israel or America, or both? Get them to come to places where the Torah learning is already prolific? Or should we set up Russia, Shiurim? And Rav Shach, who analyzed everything from a Torah perspective, said, you have to set up in Russia. Not everyone is going to come to Israel. Not everyone's going to go to America. They're going to want to stay in their cultural pond, so to speak. And we have to set up, and because of that, many yeshivas and many particular Beis Yaakovs and schools were set up in Russia, and many people became. Rav Shach was looking at the big picture. I just heard a story just this week, as I mentioned a little bit, I'm speaking about Rav Shach, so someone told me a story. There's a wonderful Torah institution here in Eretz Yisrael called Marava. The rabbis know it a lot better, run by a good friend and a good neighbor of Karlinsky, Rav Baruch Cheit. When Rav Baruch Cheit opened up Marava, which is a high school, it was with the focus that we're going to have an integration of Limudei Kodesh together with Limudei Chol. And we all know at the time, Rav Shach was adamantly against the founding of the Marava Yeshiva. He felt this is not what we do here in Eretz Yisrael. In America, Eretz Yisrael has to be Kula Kodesh. And there was whole discussions about it. Rav Baruch had Rabbeim, Rav Baruch had support, Rav Baruch opened up the yeshiva, and Marava today is a great success, and there are a lot of wonderful students that have gone through Marava. There was one particular boy that was studying in Marava at the time, and he had heard that Rav Shach was against it, and he had guilt feelings. I'm in a place and Rav Shach is against it, how can I stay here? So he picked himself up, went to Bnei Brak, and he said he'll go to the so-called horse's mouth, and I'll hear from him. He'll say, get out of there. I don't know. So he went to Rav Shach and he said, I'm a student in Marava, and I heard the Rashiv is against it. Perhaps I should leave. So he says, tell me about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Tell me about your parents. Who were they? Where did they grow up? He understood they came from America. He understood that the parents were people that had a secular education as well. And they needed to have that for their particular son who was coming in Aliyah. And that's why they sent him there. And Rav Shach said, you belong in Marava. And you should have bracha in Marava. This is a gadol. He had a public position for what he felt was the right public position to have for the tzibur in Eretz Yisrael. But individuals are individuals. And Rav Shach had the greatness of spirit and mind to be able to take that into account when you're making a decision, each person on his own choice. I subsequently, when I opened up a yeshiva on my own near Yaakov, so I did it with the blessing of Rav Shach, and Rav Shach told me, because I used to come to him a lot, he said, I'm the Nasi, I'm the president of the yeshiva. He didn't say it with hubris. He said, because I want you to feel that you can come to me all the time. I'm the Nasi. And he told me like this. He said, if you want to put it on the stationery, that Rav Shach is a Nasi, if it will help you, do it. If it won't help you, because his name is not necessarily synonymous with every particular genre of modern Orthodox Jewry as being like the type of person you want to send your son to, if it's going to harm you, you don't have to put it on. But I'm still the Nasi of this year. And for many years, I would get advice from him. And I just saw what he was. 1991. First, Israel, Scud missiles, we remember it well, and Saddam Hussein was threatening to bomb Israel, And at that time, the analysis was that he has chemical warfare, chemical missiles, chemical warheads, and eventually they shot 39 missiles into Israel, and miracles upon miracles, only one person died, and there was no chemical warfare, and eventually Israel stayed out of it because, I don't remember who the president was it Bush? Bush Sr.? Was it Bush Sr.? Bush Sr., right? Bush Sr. said, we're going to take care of it. It's a whole story in itself. I'm running a small yeshiva of American students. I felt the responsibility. Boy, it was going on for months and months. Every day it was like, boy, they're going to bomb us. We had gas masks. We had to learn how to put on gas masks. Our children, worried about our children. So I said to myself, is it responsible for me to bring young American students into a war zone? I go to Rav Shach, and Rav Shach said, Rabbi Liff, you haven't been in Israel long enough. They threaten war, and then the war doesn't happen. They don't threaten war, and the war happens. This country runs on a different plane. So right now there's no war. Who knows what will happen? Who knows what will happen? He says that's number one. Number two is, your students, they're not like the ultra-Orthodox students from Lakewood or from Borough Park, that if they don't come to learn in Brisk or Mir, they'll go learn in Lakewood, they'll go here, they'll go there. It's not necessarily going to affect their futures as much as your students. They don't get the opportunity, the unique opportunity that you can give them by being in Eretz Yisrael and giving them what you can give them and helping to train them. So it's almost as if you're putting them into a non-Jewish environment. They're going to go straight to college, go straight to university, and unfortunately, you guys went to university, went to college, and Baruch Hashem, you came out of it. But you know what the trials and tribulations are. For a young 18-year-old to go there, it's not simple. He says, you can tell the parents and the students that they could all come to Israel. And that's what happened. We started the year. We had a full complement of Talmidim. And then the war drums were beating even louder and louder. And all of a sudden, it's coming January, and January was the so-called date when America, and I can't remember who said what, this is going to be the deadline. Eventually the deadline, I think January 16th, when it turned out, I had a lot of parents and a lot of grandparents that were calling me, and they were saying, you can't keep them there, chemical warfare, how can you do this? I said, and this I'd asked Rav Shach originally. I'd asked him, what happens if a parent cries that she wants her kid, parents cries, parents tears, you don't sew up with them. The parent is crying and you can't convince them that it's going to be alright. You can send them home. You have to send them home. Parents tears, they cover everything. I receive a phone call from Rav Shach Zatzal, and he calls me 2 weeks before the deadline, and he says, Rav Liff, Rav Shach asked me to call you, to tell you that what he told you in the end of August, beginning of September, that you can bring the students to Eretz Yisrael. I know you're worried about them coming, and what I said then, it applies now. They can still come. They can still come. And even if there'll be a war, but he gave his instructions. He took responsibility. But not took responsibility. He remembered a conversation that he had with a young fledgling Rosh Yeshiva, and he said that person is probably worried about what's going to be. This is the type of personality that we're talking about. There's a great person who passed away not so long ago. I think it's already his third year. It's like Rabbi Yehoshua Zatzal, who we knew very, very well. He was the mashgiach of one of the illustrious yeshivas here in our so-called Ateres Yisrael by Rabbi Baruch Mordechai Ezrachi Zatzal. And after Shach passed away, I requested that he come during the Shloshim and give some words, because he was also very close to Shach. So he said over a fantastic story, which really, it's just beyond. Really, it kind of like just steps up what the concept of a gadol is. So, Rav Chaim Walken Zatzal, his first job in the world of chinuch. He had studied in Telz, he had studied in the Mir Yeshiva. He came from great illustrious lineage. His first job was an Eish. He was an Eish Torah, was a Rebbe by Rav Menachem Shach Zatzal. A lot of Talmidim from the Mir Yeshiva became Rabbeim over there. And he was a Rebbe there. He lived in Ezra's Torah. Rabbeim, I don't know what it's like in Shapell's, but Rabbeim don't exactly live high on the hog. They don't, they're not getting a lot of remuneration for the time and effort that they put in. And at that time, he was a Rebbe. It's a struggle, but you're doing teaching. It's the greatest gift that you can do. Bring a person to a different understanding of what the Torah is all about, the connection to God. And but he struggled. And then there was an idea that was floated, because at that time Arik Sharon, I think, was the defense minister or something like that they wanted to open up the West Bank. So there's a yishuv called Tekoa, with Mala Amos, which is next to Tekoa, and Esha Torah was offered to get land, which they eventually got, and to build a yishuv. And at that time, it wasn't like it is today in the West Bank. Terrorist activity wasn't as strong as it is today. It's always been terrorist activity, but it wasn't as strong. But there came a plan, and Rav Noach wanted that Reb Chaim Walken should be the Rav of the Yishuv. He should be the Rosh Hashiva of the Yishuv. They'd open up a branch there. And they were offering land, they were offering housing, a lot of benefits. And it sounded like a great opportunity, but he knew you don't do things in Israel unless you go to Rav Shach. He was not a disciple of Rav Shach. He wasn't a Talmud of Rav Shach, the Talmud of the Mir. So he goes to Rav Shach, and everyone was waiting to hear from the committee about what Rav Shach is going to say. He goes into him and he presents exactly what the plan is, where it is, and everything else. And Rav Shach listened to everything. Rav Shach said, Reb Chaim, it sounds like a great idea for you. You'll be the Rav, you'll be the Rosh, you'll be able to be Mashpia on others. You'll have housing. Things will be easier. It's good for you. He said it's good for you. And Reb Chaim Walken understood that he didn't have any opposition to him going there. So he came out of the meeting, and subsequently he called the group, the committee, and he said, Rav Shach said, we can go. It's an all go. Everyone was excited. Rav Shach said, it's an all go. Rav Shach said, Reb Chaim Walken could be a Rav, can move there. He went home, and by the time he got home, which was about an hour later, the phone was ringing, and it was the Gabbai of Rav Shach. And this is what he said. He said, Rav Shach said, you were just by him, and he wanted me to give you a message. The next time you're in Bnei Brak, come by to see me. Come by to see me. That's what he said. So he understood there's something going on over here. So he quickly got in the taxi. He went back to Bnei Brak the same day, and he goes into Rav Shach and he says, Rebbe, I didn't tell you to come now. Whenever you come, but you came. Okay. He said, listen, I told you what I told you because you asked it, and it's for yourself, and I really feel it's a good opportunity for you. But to my own students, my own Talmidim, they all know that I have a certain geopolitical, he didn't say the word geopolitical, but that's what it was, a geopolitical look on the West Bank, on the UN, on American national security policy, like we're seeing today, even today, with Trump in power, you know what I mean? But Palestinian state and everything else. He says the pressure to give away the West Bank, it's always there. And Rav Shach always felt his students should not move to the West Bank. So I just tell you, my own students, I tell them not to go. So Reb Chaim Walken says, Rebbe, ich bin a Talmud. I'm a Talmud. I'm now declaration. I am a Talmud of your Shach. I said, you're a Talmud? You're a Talmud? If you're a Talmud, don't go. Don't go. So Reb Walken accepted it. He went outside, picked up the phone to the same committee. He says, listen, Rav Shach didn't say no one can go. He just said to me, as a Talmud, not to go, and I'm a Talmud, I'm not going. That's not the end of the story. A few weeks later, there's a knock on his door in Ezra's Torah. He went back to Eish. He's a regular Rebbe. He's getting a regular Rebbe salary. All of a sudden, a knock on the door, and there was some Kolo-looking guy from Bnei Brak. They have the special look, and he says, Reb Walken, he says, yeah. He says, he pulls out an envelope, And he gives him the envelope. He says, "This is from Rav Shach." Rav Shach, what is it? He opens it up and he sees there's $200 inside. 200 American dollars. He says, "What is this?" He says, "I don't know anything. I'm just a shliach." So he picks up the phone. He calls the gabbai from Rav Shach and he says, "What is this all about?" So he says, "Listen, Rav Shach felt that he had given you a piece of advice originally that could have been a good thing for you financially and everything else. He knew he heard your situation. And then he told you as a Talmud not to do it. He feels a responsibility. It's not tzedakah money. It's his own private money. And he insists on you taking it." Now, $200 today doesn't sound like a lot of money. But to a Rebbe that was making maybe $400, $200 was like, 50% raise. That's pretty good. So, but okay, it was $200. The next 12 months, every single month, that same younger man came, knocked on the door, delivered $200 from Rav Shach for Chaim Wolf. Not only the next 12 months. For the next 4 years, Rav Shach would send his own personal money to this Rebbe in Eish Torah. Until that point, Rav Chaim Walken already had gone to Petach Tikva, and eventually he became the mashgiach in Ateres. He already was financially more stable than Rav Shach started. Look at the response, the taking responsibility and the care of what a true gadol is all about. These are personal glimpses. It doesn't really create the whole picture of who Rav Shach was. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He was a tremendous Ohev Yisrael. He cared about the Jewish nation. He got up and he would make statements which sometimes people were opposed to. But he always felt that he has the right, because he is giving over what he felt was the Masoros of the Torah. And it was very, very important for him that the yeshivas continue learning. If you're following the news, the current events that's going on, and this has been a issue, and I'm not here to give over Das Torah or my Das Torah. You have wonderful, wonderful yeshivas. They discuss all these issues, I'm sure, and many of you have discussed it, about the issue of yeshiva students going to the army and what it's all about. But there's no question in my mind that if we take a look at what's happening, which is there's a battle of the soul of the Jewish nation. And really the question is, what's the soul of the Jewish nation? I want to end off, because we only have another minute, right? 1 o'clock? I want to end off just with one vort that Rav Shach Zatzal used to say, which maybe depict this point and maybe bring out a little bit of what a final point on who Rav Shach was and what it's all about, and why the legacy continues till today. After the Akedah, the pasuk says, "Vayoshav Avram el No'arav." Avram Avinu returned to the young people. Who were the young people? Eliezer and Yishmael. They had escorted him, and he returned. There's one thing that's missing. Doesn't say anything about Yitzchak. Vayoshav Avram el No'arav. What happened to Yitzchak? So the Medrash says, and the Targum Yonason ben Azil brings it down, Avram Avinu told Yitzchak, you have to go to yeshiva. Go to the yeshiva, Shem V'Aver. Shame. Question about it. And Yitzchak went for years to study at the yeshiva Shem. He didn't even go home. I always find it something which needs an explanation. You know what I mean? His mother died. I don't know, was he at the funeral? Do we know if he was at the funeral? Don't know. Not sure. It doesn't say. Could be he didn't leave for funerals. He was in the... So Rav Shach said, the Medrash says, why did Avram Avinu send Yitzchak after the Akedah to the yeshiva of Shem? Because he said, what brought me to the point that I was able to stand up to this test of being willing to give my son over because of the command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take his life, and eventually he told me not to take his life. But what gave me that ability to be able to stand up to that test was the fact that I was able to learn Torah. My son should continue it. My son should continue. The Torah has to be learned. When we say learned, it's not just the learning, it's the inculcation of the lessons of the Torah. It's the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. It's the betterment of the midas tovas that the Torah gives us. And we don't realize when we have people who they defended the sanctity of the yeshivas, what they have done for generations, what they are continuing to do, and what our response should be as people that understand a little bit better what the Torah is all about. The pasuk says, the Rambam brings down the last halacha in the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, that the Torah will spread out Yemosa Mashiach Kemayim Eliyam Mechasim. The world will be filled with the knowledge of Torah. We're living in a generation where the knowledge of Torah is really beyond. I have students of mine, I'm blessed, who have written major svarim. I call them Talmidei Yosef Mikulam, on halacha, on agadata. A typical Avreich that's living in Kiryat Sefer has knowledge of Shas, Dirshu, Mishnah Bruras, everything else. This is all an outcome of the revolution of the Torah that's being learned here in Mitzion. Ki Mitzion takes a Torah, the Varashem Yerushalayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu should give bracha to all of us. And we should be Zocheh B'Yirtzeh Hashem, through our dedication to Torah, become better people, to care about Klal Yisrael. You hear a little bit about these glimpses, and it kind of makes us feel like, boy, I got a long way to go. Yes, we all have a long way to go. One step at a time, B'Yirtzeh Hashem will get there. Yes, Shukar for listening. Thank you.